From single-person presentations, we move now to our first panel discussion. It will be moderated by Carol Schumacher and Michael Starbird. I'm going to let them introduce their panelists, and I will say about them only this. Carol is a professor of mathematics at Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio, and Mike is a distinguished teaching professor of mathematics at the University of Texas at Austin. They are both longtime students, practitioners, and supporters of the Moore method and inquiry-based learning. I'll turn the program over to them right now.
Over the last several years, I've been very honored to be involved in the committee for the undergraduate program in mathematics of the MAA. The charge of this committee is to deal with all things associated with the undergraduate program, I guess as the title suggests. One of the big charges of the committee is every 10 years to write a set of recommendations to the profession about quality undergraduate education in mathematics. We're in the process of working on the next curriculum guide, which we expect to come out in 2015. And our panelists today, and also actually Mike and me, Mike and myself, we're members of the steering committee that's working on this project. The steering committee is a small number of people, but we hope to have lots of involvement from lots of members of the community in gathering the wisdom of our colleagues to make recommendations to the profession. So we're going to be asking our panelists to tell us a number of things about this, something about the history of these sorts of projects and the kinds of recommendations that have been made, the status of the project as we have it now, and what some of the things that we're trying to do. So we're going to start with Michael Pearson, and I think Mike Starbird is going to introduce him.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Carol.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that kind introduction. It's my pleasure to introduce Michael Pearson. Where is Michael Pearson? Is he? Oh, there he is, right there. That's Michael at the end there, Michael Pearson. And I was reminded yesterday that I actually introduced Michael Pearson to Carol when they were both students in my graduate topology class at the University of Texas. And they did very well in the class, I must say. And Michael has gone on to great things, including becoming the executive director of the Mathematics Association of America, which he is now. And so we always bow whenever we see him. And tempted though I am, since you see, my introduction to him was as a student in class, so I'm tempted to ask him to prove that every metric space is paracompact, and instead of his prepared remarks about the curriculum guide, I suppose I should ask him instead to put into perspective the relationship of the MAA with this organization.
Thank you, Mike. Before I talk about the relationship between inquiry-based learning and the MAA and why we're here, I wanted to relay a little bit more about my personal experience, just because I can. So I guess my first experience with inquiry-based learning, or the Moore method, was through students of H.S. Walls. I had, as an undergraduate, I had Russell Stokes as a professor in a vector calculus class, and Professor Stokes was a formidable figure around the campus of Ole Miss. And as I recall, there were, you know, it was a regular complement of students, 32, 34 students that started that course. And I think I was one of 8 who that stayed in it after the first week. But his style of teaching wasn't necessarily in line with other people's in the department. But I stuck with it. I wanted to have the course. It turned out to be a very good experience, and in fact was one of the experiences that convinced me that maybe going to graduate school wouldn't be bad. And he wrote me a nice letter of recommendation later, and I went off, actually, before coming to Texas, I took a detour to Mississippi State and got a master's degree, and there another Wall student, Bob Heller, taught me a course in real analysis. It was a pure Moore method course, and it was a great experience for me, working through problems on measure theory and Lebesgue integration. First time I'd ever seen the stuff, but I learned a lot. I will say, though, that in that particular class, I also saw that there were other students who maybe weren't getting so much out of it for whatever reason. They weren't willing to stand up to the board quite as much as I was. But in any case, it got, you know, those experiences really made me begin to think about what it meant to teach mathematics and what it meant to try to engage students in their own education. And so over the years, Mike's course, other courses I've had, just later in the early 90s, I got involved in some of the calculus reform stuff that Ron Douglas and Bernie Madison and others instigated in the late 80s at the Tulane Conference. And there were a lot of themes that were developed over that time. And I think MAA, and I've been a member of MAA now for 30 years, and I'm very, very pleased to be a part of an organization that I feel has had a long-term stake in the game of trying to improve undergraduate education and mathematics education in this country more generally. David Bressoud, in a few minutes, is going to talk a little bit more about the last CUPM guide, which is the nominal theme for this panel discussion. But, you know, in thinking about this, this panel, I did a lot of review of some of the historical material, and in fact, Martha and I, when Martha came on as chair of this committee, what is it, almost 2 years ago now, a year and a half anyway, we began to think about the history of CUPM, the work of CUPM, and how that might inform the work as we develop the next revision of the guide, which we anticipate coming out in 2 or 3 years. And in the 2004 guide, the last version, one of the core recommendations, there were 6 recommendations that were endorsed as official MAA policy by the Board of Governors that were at the center of the guide. And one of those recommendations is that every course should incorporate activities that will help all students progress in developing analytical, critical reasoning, problem solving, and communication skills, and acquiring mathematical habits of mind. More specifically, these activities should be designed to advance and measure students' progress in learning, to state problems carefully, modify problems when necessary to make them tractable, articulate assumptions, appreciate the value of precise definition, reason logically to conclusions, and interpret results intelligently. Approach problem solving with a willingness to try multiple approaches, persist in the face of difficulties, assess the correctness of solutions, explore examples, pose questions, and devise and test conjectures. Now, that sounds a lot like inquiry-based learning to me. And in fact, I think that the common theme of most of what I've observed in my career up to this point has resonated well with the themes that this conference has been working towards over the years. And I think the key elements that Sandra Larson's research has identified as fundamental to the success of inquiry-based learning. And I think that's a really good thing, that we're beginning to both take a broad view of what it means to engage students in the classroom and what constitutes inquiry-based learning. And so I think that's why MAA has become more active in this conference, and I think it fits with our long-term mission. And in fact, that long-term mission, as expressed through CUPM, has been going on a long time. CUPM was established in the mid-50s. We've been working on on questions along these lines from the very beginning. Let's see. I was going to get a really older quote out of this. So here's one from a 1971 report. Now this one was speaking to teachers, but it resonated with the themes of the time. Prospective teachers should be led to regard mathematics as a creative activity, something which one does rather than merely something which one learns. The active participation of the student in the process of discovering and communicating mathematical ideas is crucial for his real understanding. Courses should be taught in ways that foster active student involvement in the development and presentation of mathematical ideas. That was from 1971.
That was just accepted.
Oh, so even in the pipeline now, a newly accepted book, Distilling Ideas, An Introduction to Mathematics Through Inquiry, a book Mike's writing with Brian Katz. So, you know, I could make a long, long list of things which we have done over the years. At the high school level, the American Mathematics Competition produces materials, sets of problems that are not the typical thing that students see in the classroom. It's not handing them, you know, 3 through 31 odd or something, but it's giving them problems that require them to stretch their brain, make connections between different ideas, different mathematical concepts, and really make them engage with mathematics in ways that that we believe are productive. So I think that's probably about enough for me to say. I'm, again, happy to be here today and look forward to talking with folks over the next couple of days, and happy to share more with you about at least my personal vision of where I see the MAA going over the next few years. Thanks.
Our next speaker today is David Bressoud from Macalester College. He's the immediate past president of the MAA. He's also heading up a large-scale study of effective instruction in Calculus 1, and he's going to tell, and that's actually feeding into our project about the next curriculum guide as well, but he's going to give a talk on that tomorrow afternoon, is that right? Something? Yeah. So he'll say more about that then, and so he's not going to talk about that today, but he was also a former chair of CUPM and was on the writing committee for the last curriculum guide, and so he's going to tell us a little bit about what that guide did and what it was trying to do, and sort of where that brings us to today.
Thank you, Carol. I'm going to give you a little teaser for tomorrow afternoon in hopes that then you'll show up for my talk. The calculus study that the MAA has done is a 5-year study with 2 large parts. One is a national survey that was conducted in the fall of 2010, finding out who's taking mainstream Calculus 1, why are they there, what's their background, and most importantly, what happens to them in Calculus 1, and what happens to their goals, their aspirations, their attitudes towards mathematics. The second part of the study are going to be case studies. We've identified 16 colleges and universities around the country that seem to have particularly effective calculus programs. In this fall, we've got 4 teams of 3 people each that'll be fanning out across the country to actually go to these places and find out what they're doing right. And I will let you in on one of the things that we've discovered that really has a huge impact on students' desire to continue in mathematically intensive majors, to continue with their mathematics, and that's the way they see mathematics. If they see mathematics as a question of making logical connections, making sense of the mathematics, if they see it as problem solving, where they're challenging problems, those students are likely to continue on with the mathematics. If they see the calculus as a process of learning how to do certain kinds of standard manipulations, they are much less likely to continue on with the calculus. No surprise to anybody here, but what we're finding is the kind of information that backs up exactly the sorts of approaches. that we're looking at here. I appreciate this opportunity to talk about the last curriculum guide because I was one of the writers for it, and I enjoy any opportunity I get to let people know about this guide. And if you haven't read it, if you're not familiar with it, I hope you'll go back and look at it. It can be downloaded in PDF file. Just go to maa.org/CUPM. It's as simple as that. maa.org/CUPM, and you can download the guide. The curriculum guides that the MAA has produced over the many years that it's been doing this, really going back into the 1950s, most of them have focused on the mathematics courses for the majors. And when we were looking at putting together the curriculum guide in 2004, we realized that departments need a lot more advice about how to handle mathematics courses for students who may not be majors in mathematics. So how do you handle all of the service courses that are out there, the courses that are providing the mathematics for the other disciplines? Also important because as I go around the country and talk with math departments, the most common excuse that I hear for not doing something that's innovative is the engineers won't let us. We've got all this material that we've got to cover because the engineers tell us that we have to cover it. Or you can substitute for the engineers, the biologists or the economists or the physicists. And so what we decided to do as we got started on writing the 2004 guide was to find out what exactly those partner disciplines really want from the mathematics department. Not a list of topics, but what are the kinds of skills, abilities, understandings that those departments really want from mathematics. And we ran a series of workshops called the Curriculum Foundations Project. And the idea behind it was to bring together people who were working on undergraduate education in their discipline, whether it was engineering or physics or chemistry, to come together and put together a brief document explaining what that discipline really needs from the mathematics courses to which they send their students. So what do engineers really want their students to get out of the math courses that they take? We had a few mathematicians present in the room to make sure that what the engineers said was intelligible to the mathematical community, and perhaps to prod them occasionally to explain what they were saying. But we put together a book, the Curriculum Foundations Project. This also is available for free on the MAA website. It's maa.org/CUPM/crafty, C-R-A-F-T-Y. So just an extra, and then on that page you'll find a link to CF Project, the Curriculum Foundations Project. And it's a wonderful place to get started with conversations with the other disciplines. So it's 6 to 8 pages for each of these disciplines that really lays out not a list of topics, but what are the kinds of abilities. One of the things that was very eye-opening were the project reports that we got from the engineers. So we heard from different groups of engineers. There's one report written by electrical engineers, and one written by chemical engineers, and one written by mechanical engineers. They have different needs. But all of them were very much in line with the ABET reports. And if you're not familiar with the ABET 2000, you really should look at that, because that really changed what the engineers really want. It used to be that the engineers did have a list of courses and a list of topics. But in the year 2000, the Accreditation Agency for Engineering came out with a new document that talked about what are the kinds of abilities that the engineers need to graduate with. That's where the engineering really is today. And these Curriculum Foundations project reports are a good way of getting that conversation going. Now, I'm not saying you're going to give that to your engineers and say, see, this is what other engineers said that you need, but rather give it to them and say, this is what a group of engineers suggested, and let's use that as a starting point to build a useful conversation about what your department really needs. And as I've gone around and I've talked with engineers and I've talked about the kind of IBL courses that we've been looking at, most engineers really like that approach. That pushes the kinds of things that they need from their students. And so I think drawing on the Curriculum Foundations project can help with that. Again, I don't have this up, but it's maa.org/CUPM/crafty, C-R-A-F-T-Y, and then just follow the link to CF project. As I said, the curriculum guide that was published in 2004 was focusing on the courses for the partner disciplines. As Michael mentioned, there were 6 recommendations. The second one really gets at the kinds of issues that we're talking with inquiry-based learning. It's about students learning how to solve problems, how to think about mathematics for themselves, how to develop analytical and critical reasoning skills. The other recommendations deal with things like know who your students are, make sure you're teaching the students you have, not the students you wish you had. Bringing in a variety of perspectives and examples, encouraging collaborations with other departments, appropriate use of technology, and also one that I know everybody in this room will appreciate, that you need to reward those faculty who are engaged in strengthening the curriculum and improving teaching and learning in the institution. And then we go into a lot of detail with the different types of service courses and how to really bring about those changes. I still think, and certainly everybody on CUPM agrees, that the 2004 guide was very useful for what it was doing, which was setting up some important guidelines for how to deal with those courses that reach out to the other disciplines. And with that, I'll turn it over to our next introducer for Martha and give you some idea of what the current guide is going to be doing.
The next speaker, whom I will introduce now, is Martha Siegel from Towson University. She was the secretary of the Mathematics Association of America for 14 years, so she's been in the central leadership for a long time. Currently, she chairs the CUPM, which is the Committee on the Undergraduate Program in Mathematics. It's been said many times, but that's what the letters stand for, you see. Committee on the Undergraduate Program in Mathematics. She chairs it and is also the chair of the steering committee for the new curriculum guide. So she will discuss the state and structure of the current project. Martha.
Thank you. First, I want to say that I was introduced to a form of IBL when I was in high school. As a 10th grader, I was put into a geometry class, and it was an honors class that I didn't really, I felt like I was out of place from day one. But very quickly, I learned how much fun it was to have the responsibility to do interesting things. And we had, from the beginning, assigned a series each semester of something like 25 problems. And at the end of the semester, you were to hand in all the solutions you possibly could. It turned out that in that class, 4 of us got PhDs in mathematics eventually. At least one person in that class solved all the problems in week 1, and the rest of us just struggled along. But my parents were fascinated with the fact that the phone would ring at various times of the evening, and it would be a very short conversation. Someone would call and say, I did 20, number 20. And then my end of the conversation was something like, did you draw the line from G to I? Okay, bye, don't tell me anymore. And that was the end of the conversation. And so I suppose there was a little cheating going on in that, people talked about this, but it went on all semester. We talked about it, both semesters. And I think it convinced me at that time that I could be a mathematician. I also would say that I took points at topology using the Moore method, and I was one of those people who had what I would call a challenge getting up in front of the classroom. But I kept taking more courses. I got more and more confidence. And when I began teaching, I really enjoyed using a form of IBL, which is, I consider it really a form, using a lot of group work with inquiry-based calculus. And I was untenured, and people came to my classroom, and at that time, people reported that I wasn't teaching. So I have a lot of sympathy with for young faculty who try new things. I did get tenure. I would like to say that the curriculum guide is to be a document that we hope will evolve with time. We know we're preparing a document that we hope will come out in 2015, and it might not be replaced by another such document for another 10 years. Time does not wait for us to make new decisions, and curriculum changes constantly. The advantage we have now is that we have the web, we have electronic postings, we have opportunities to make changes and to contribute to what's going on. And we hope that as we evolve to get our 2015 report, you will help us. And furthermore, once it's up there in some sort of final form, there's no such thing now, you will help us with it as it evolves. Our main purpose here is to try to look at recommendations for a curriculum for various majors in the mathematical sciences. Things have changed a lot since the specificity of the 1990 CUPM report on the curriculum, because the number of tracks, concentrations, dual majors, double majors, preparation for graduate school in a variety of fields, and the growth of the professional master's programs throughout the country have changed the viewpoint of our students and the viewpoint of our, I don't even know what to call them. They're not math majors necessarily. We need to re-examine what we're doing, and that's what we hope to do. We do not want to publish a guide to curriculum that's devoid of some understanding of how people learn. And we definitely have framed our entire work with an eye toward what we consider our cognitive goals and what we might consider eventually, we don't have them all yet, some are in the prior work of the Foundations report, what we might consider outcomes, skill-based kinds of goals. So we're hoping that we have research-based evidence for making recommendations for how things should work in the teaching end of things, as well as some evidence of what might be considered effective programs. Is it just the number of graduates you have? No. Is it just the number of courses you can offer? No. Somehow we have to figure out a variety of approaches so that many different schools can apply some of our recommendations. So we're going about it in a kind of, it's a complicated project. We're going about it in the following way. I would be happy to listen to all suggestions. We have at this point looked at, well, first I should say that Carol Schumacher preceded me as chair of CUPM, and she had already initiated a number of focus groups with mathematicians in mid-career who were teaching and had some wide view of what they consider the current problems in offering math majors. We talked to directors of PhD programs. We talked to directors of professional master's programs. We talked to undergraduate chairs. So we've had a number of different focus groups. And there are some central questions that we know we should be answering. One of those questions we are not going to answer, and that is calculus. It's the big elephant in the room, we understand it, but it's a big project. David's begun to get some answers, and we're not going to try to take what we don't know and make statements about it. We've already found out a lot that we do know from David's project, and that will enter into the report. So we looked at all the different types of concentrations and areas that mathematics majors tend to go into, not necessarily as careers, but in terms of what they're studying now and what they're interested in. And we're looking at both major and minor programs that might appeal to students in these areas. Let me say that we've begun by forming our little steering committee, and we're involving other committees in our work. So let me say that MAA has a variety of committees. This is, after all, an MAA project. The Committee on the Mathematical Education of Teachers is taking a central role, and Beth Borroughs is on this panel. She'll talk a little bit about that. There's a Committee on Undergraduate Research. There's a Committee on Mathematics across the disciplines that really deals with many of the issues that we've talked about in the foundations. You know, what do other disciplines want? What would we call an applied math major? Things of that sort. And the Committee on the Teaching of Undergraduate Mathematics, which is an MAA committee that deals with pedagogical issues. And with, we have other committees that deal with technology in math education. All of these will be brought into, in some way, into our discussion, or they may file separate reports. We've had a number of groups working already on courses. So we've asked, for example, a small group to look at discrete mathematics and to study the variety of courses in discrete mathematics that are offered, to look at maybe very successful ones by whatever measure they choose, to think about if you could design your own course, what would it look like? And to get some feedback from disciplines that tend to use those courses. We have about, I don't know, close to 20 of these course area groups that have now filed some preliminary reports, and we'll be sharing them with the community shortly. At the same time, we're now forming what we call the program area study groups, so that specific program areas such as actuarial science, biomathematics, maybe economics, and computing, for example, engineering, all of these groups will be looking at not just the service courses, which is in the foundation's realm, which of course is already 11 years old. Well, not, it's 2000, I know what year it is. It's 8 years old now, but to look at what we would do for math majors who would want to follow perhaps a track in that other discipline, and we intend to invite people from those disciplines to contribute. And likewise, we hope to attract people from those disciplines to build up a substantial number of mathematics courses in their own in their own programs. We'll be presenting at Math Fest, which will be in August in Madison, Wisconsin. We will have a panel presenting some of the recommendations for the course groups. So there'll be a presentation on abstract algebra. I suspect there'll be a presentation on transitions to proof courses. And we hope that people will contribute to the discussion at that panel presentation. We've left time for lots of discussion, especially to include how the course is presented rather than topic by topic by topic. We hope, as I tried to say, that we will give a sense of how courses have evolved over time and to look to the future. This report will come out in 2015. If another report doesn't come out until 2025, we better be ready to say something about the future and not codify the past as some sort of standard to which we're going to aim. It seems a little ridiculous. So I'm asking particularly those people who have good vision to give some educated guesses as to where you think we might be headed. Help us out a little. Let me also say that we are not looking at any graduate level programs per se, but we are looking at preparation of students for graduate work. We recognize that in today's world this may be necessary and you can't do everything in 4 years. We will also be looking at models that work. So if you think you have at your school, or you know people who have models that work, meaning courses that are new and innovative and seem terrific, or entire programs that work, please let us know. I'll be here all week, until, it feels like a week, right? I'll be here until the end of the conference. You can find my email in the listings from the program. And I hope you will point out those things that you find interesting, either from the way in which the material is presented or the kind of courses that have been put together, and let us know about them, because this is the only way we can find out. So help us if you can. Thank you.
Our last presenter, and then we hope to have some time to take comments and questions from you all and maybe get a discussion going. Our last presenter is Beth Borroughs. She's at Montana State University, and her role on the panel is as the chair of COMET, which is the MAA's Committee on the Mathematical Education of Teachers. And in this age of the coming Common Core standards that we're all seeing on the horizon, we are presented with many challenges, but also opportunities in finding ways of making those things work well for the students of the future. And that has a lot of consequences for the way that we educate the people that are going to be teaching in those Common Core standards. So Beth is going to tell us a little bit about the way that COMET is working to help us with good recommendations in our next guide.
So I am acutely aware that my time to talk coincides with when you were promised a break. So I will keep my remarks as short as I can and hope that you will stick around to ask some questions, because that's maybe the best opportunity for all of us. So just to reiterate, I am the chair of the Committee on the Mathematical Education of Teachers. And our role, among other things, is to make recommendations both for pre-service teacher preparation, so that's what you would call undergraduates who are going to be teachers, and then also in-service professional development. So teachers who are in the classroom, what kind of support can we give them? So with, as Carol points out, this era of Common Core, there are opportunities for mathematicians to be involved at both levels, both working with pre-service teachers and in-service teachers. So it's fortuitous that this cycle has come around for the curriculum guide, and it coincides with a time where school mathematics is receiving a lot of attention because of the Common Core state standards for mathematics. And when I say they're receiving a lot of attention, I don't mean from mathematicians, because mathematicians think about school mathematics quite a bit. But classroom teachers who have been thinking about math as a subject that they teach right between 9 and 10 in the morning suddenly are thinking about ways that they can change how they teach mathematics and what they teach about mathematics. And they're asking for professional development opportunities because they recognize that there's a challenge in these new standards that are in almost all of the states. They're not everywhere, and they're not in Texas. So it gives us an opportunity. So 2 things that I'd like to point out that are particular opportunities for some of us. One of them is just a goal that we would want to support high quality instruction in K through 12 mathematics. And how can we achieve that? Well, one need is for what you might call a classroom observation protocol, a list of things to look for in a mathematics classroom to be able to judge how effective it is. Now, developing such an instrument to measure classroom instruction is difficult, and so I don't mean that we all need to dive into that. But thinking of what does it look like when mathematics is taught well? And so the kinds of clips that we saw earlier in the first talk this afternoon, thinking of what is it about those clips that would have you identify them as exemplifying rich mathematical teaching. And when you can identify those, then we can start to ask, how can we look for them in other teaching, or how can we teach others to exemplify those kinds of practices? And so then the other is just providing examples of practices within undergraduate education that exemplify deep mathematical and rich mathematics that includes inquiry or exploration or whatever noun you want to use to describe it. And so I'll end with a caution, though, and that caution is, I'll echo that Michael's quote from 1971 describing that we want to immerse teachers, future teachers, in the kind of instruction that lets them see mathematics as a creative opportunity and allows them to inquire. But we have to be careful that we can't assume that they will transfer their undergraduate experiences to the school mathematics level. So though it is very important for those teachers to have these kinds of rich mathematical experiences themselves in their undergraduate mathematics, we also have to pay close attention to providing them opportunities to examine what does that mathematics look like at the K through 12 level. So what does Algebra 1 look like in an inquiry-based manner? It's not easy for undergraduate students to make that jump themselves. Teachers teach the way they were taught, and they'll teach Algebra 1 the way they were taught Algebra 1, unless we encourage some other pedagogical emphasis for them. So with that, I think that's enough about teaching, and I hope you'll ask some questions of the whole panel.
Mike and I were up here playing rock, paper, scissors to see which one of us was going to start moderating this, and I lost. So, seriously, we would like to hear from you if you have something to say or have questions for the panel or suggestions for the panel right now for a little bit, and then also at any time during the conference. Most of us, not Beth Borroughs, she's leaving after today. So if you want to corner her to ask her questions, you'll have to do that today. But I think the rest of us are going to be here for the rest of the time. So questions, comments, whatever. Brian Katz. Yeah, microphones will be coming around to you because we want to be able to hear what you say.
At my institution, well, I certainly have a reputation of asking a lot more time outside of class than other people in my department, and our department more than the rest of the college. And there's some claims that this is common in math And I was just wondering if anyone could tell me if I'm right or wrong about that. Does my question make sense?
You said time off?
Time outside of class.
How much time you spend outside of class on the courses?
Like my students tell me
That's-
they spend about 5 hours a week on a class on their other classes and about 11 hours a week on my class.
That's certainly true at Kenyon.
I just, the old formula was 2 hours outside of class for every hour inside of class. But I don't think students expect to spend that, and we know from many, many studies that they do not. So in some cases, we've provided clinics and walk-in labs and regular labs and so on, so that they feel they come in and maybe get some guidance. That isn't the ideal situation, because many times those people in those places are helping the students to do the homework that we want them to suffer through in some sense. We want them to develop independence. So it's not always the best solution.
All right, my question was, there was a talk about you've been doing a lot of work in incorporating service classes for this. What about core level classes, so the classes before things like calculus that are for more like liberal arts majors? Has there been any work to incorporate what we need from an undergraduate program for those sort of math classes?
Yeah, there is work on those, the pre-calculus level or the mathematics for liberal arts that is discussed in the 2004 guide. We do not discuss pre-college level or remedial courses. That's not something that we get into. But other college credit-bearing courses that are not at the level of calculus are discussed.
Yeah, do look at the 2004 guide for that.
Faculty in disciplines other than science and engineering. That is, you mentioned liberal arts. And in fact, yes, there was a second, a Curriculum Foundations 2 project that followed the first project. And the results of those where we had, convocations with faculty from political science and economics and I think journalism and so forth. So those have been published now. They're also on that Crafty website that David mentioned.
I think also Crafty's put together a report on pre-calculus and college algebra. I don't know which one came first, and I'm not sure they're both out, but.
This is really the last question now.
I'm Nate Dean. I'm chair of the math department at Texas State University. And this question basically comes from debates we have within my department regarding prerequisites. And I wondered if the booklet that you're preparing actually addresses prerequisites in the sense that, for example, we offer discrete math types of courses, and most of them require calculus as a prerequisite. And we've debated about this. Some people say, well, we don't need calculus for it. We can teach it quite easily without calculus. But then some other people say, well, we want that mathematical maturity to exist at that particular level when they want to take that particular course. And so there's this debate, and right now we require calculus 2, actually, for discrete math. And I wondered if this kind of issue is addressed in this curriculum guide.
Well, I'll speak to that briefly, and I think the answer is that we want to try to make the program as broad as possible instead of as linear as possible, so that students could come in at various entry points. And that brings me to a request that we have been discussing quite a bit. Are there different ways to enter the major than calculus 1, 2, 3? What can we do to attract majors through other beginning courses? And this brings us back to this because, in fact, I was the chair of the discrete math group in the 80s that said students can start, if they've had 4 years of high school math, whatever it is, they can start with discrete math. So,
and let me just follow up too. Your question, actually, there's a broader question here, and it's on the issue of placement, how we place students in courses. we have a project currently ongoing, funded by NSF. It's called Using Research to Shape Instruction and Placement in Algebra and Pre-Calculus. But our Committee on the Articulation and Placement is actually in the beginning stages of developing other projects about placement that really try to wrestle with the question of how do we honor our students' prior experiences in mathematics, and how do we best utilize that? Do we need to think more about things like just-in-time teaching to refresh skills that maybe they've seen but have gotten rusty? How do we avoid what I think happens an awful lot, especially as students move from secondary to post-secondary education, of asking them to repeat large blocks of material that they've already seen. So those are hard questions, but they're very important questions, and questions we fully intend to try to wrestle with. I don't think this guide can wrestle with all those questions, but it's a substantial set of questions. And I'll just end with another question. And Nate, how is it that you always end up chair wherever you go?
Thank you very much.
That's a good job.
Thank you, panel.